Yeah, welcome everyone. Today we have Adam of the game Greenhouse. His game has successfully launched on Kickstarter and is funded with over 16,000 in funding. So welcome to the show, Adam.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
I'd love to learn more about Greenhouse, how it plays, what the game is all about. Love to hear more about this.
Yeah, so Greenhouse has been a labor of love, kind of in the hobby realm for about the last year. I met a wonderful woman and colleague when I was living in Minnesota, and we were working on a project together. That project came to an end, and I asked her, what if you could do anything, if you could work on anything in the world, what would it be? And she said, well, I'd work on saving it. and so I asked her more about that, and it turned out she had this rich experience with climate change work and the conversation and the activism and the communities that were working on it. And I've always been the guy who comes in and says, well, like there used to be is there an app for that? Or what's the app for that? I'm the guy who comes in and says, well, what's the game for that? And so that to me was the opportunity to say, like, do you know of any climate change games out there that are actually kind of reshaping the conversation? And for both of us, we were like, no, it's pretty much doom and gloom phrase called disaster porn, where you flash a bunch of images of climate change results and like how scary they are, and everybody gets anxious and like, oh, this is really bad. But that actually decreases the propensity to take action. It decreases the desire to have a conversation about it. And so there was a lot of resistance that I even felt to the topic. And I was like, I really loved the concept of taking that as a challenge and saying, can we make this playful? Can we flip climate change around and say, what is the real joy here? How might we actually have fun with this topic? And it took maybe a month or two of playtesting and creating different prototypes before we finally said, oh, you know what, if we just shift the focus from the problems and the dire predictions to the solutions and the teamwork and the cooperative aspect of facing this together, suddenly all of these new opportunities and feelings get unlocked. And so we kind of, for the several months after that, just started designing the game around like, okay, what happens when we put all the focus on the solutions? What happens when we really make it about the actions that we can take together? And so we developed a bunch of different mechanics, but in the basic principle of the game is that you, as players, draw climate events, things that do seem kind of scary, hurricanes, wildfires, the kinds of things that we're seeing in the news. And right on top of those, you play your actions. You play the solutions that every player holds in their hands. And collectively, you manage how much greenhouse gases are in the air, how much money you have to work with, and the amount of hope that the players have, the humans have. And if you run out of hope or you run out of money, you lose. But if you run out of greenhouse gases, if you actually eliminate them from the game, then everybody wins. And so it's a semi-cooperative. There are different variants, but it's cooperative or semi-cooperative card game. And I think we at least from what we've seen so far, the conversations have been changing. Families are coming to us saying, I want to play this game. I want to understand how to have this conversation with maybe some folks in my family who don't want to talk to me about climate change, or maybe I want to help my kids not have such a negative experience of what's happening, and actually see how they might be able to connect with and get involved. And so I think we're starting to see that it really has the impact that we wanted it to have, which is making this whole crisis feel less like a crisis and feel more like a game that we can win as long as we play it together.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, when I think of climate change, I think of this like this issue that, you know, it's obviously an issue, it's a crisis, but I don't really see how I could change it individually, right? It's kind of overwhelming in that aspect of, oh, it's this huge glooming issue that I can't solve myself. So I think what you're doing is really awesome. It's creating that conversation. It's telling people that, oh, there is a solution, and it's making it in a fun way. I think that's a really, really cool experience.
Yeah, it's been really neat for the last year as a game designer coming to this project, not knowing a whole lot about the climate change conversation and the communities involved in it. But as a former earth sciences teacher, I knew a lot about the physics and the science behind what was happening. And it was just fun to like stop debating for a minute and start like playing with and discovering the different groups that are working the problem, that are actually working on making this not just something we can where we can eliminate greenhouse gases, but also something where it's profitable to do so.
Yeah.
And so it was really neat seeing how, like, you know, all of the common tropes of, oh, this is too expensive, or this will never happen, or you can't get people to X or Y. It was like, well, here's 72 different solutions that are we know of, and there's several more out there that haven't even gotten into the game yet. But we were by having to create the cards and kind of think through the mechanics of like, how would this solution impact on a global scale greenhouse gases, or how would it impact the economy, and kind of having to think through that. And it's not, you know, it's not like it's 100% based on, like, we have scientific figures of like what happens if you restore whale populations to the global economy, but we can make an estimate, or we can make a guess based on what we know and see, how, like, the relative value of restoring whale populations to enacting carbon taxes, for instance, and like which one might have a sizable impact on the economy, which one's going to have a more sizable or projected more sizable impact on the amount of pollution. And so it was really kind of neat to, as a game designer, look at a bunch of scientific research, a bunch of solutions out there, and say, how do I balance this? How do I make this like still like understandable, but also fun, like not just educational, but also enjoyable, and something that people can really kind of access. Again, making it a more accessible topic.
Yeah, you mentioned a few things like the carbon tax as an example. I'm kind of curious, like, what other aspects of the game or examples of the game do you have?
So the events, like I mentioned, wildfires, and we actually had a card that was, we have a card called infectious diseases. And one thing that I didn't realize about climate change was that it actually is causing an uptick in infectious disease, both the origination of them and the transmission. And so we were working on this long before anyone had ever heard the phrase COVID-19. And while we were prepping for the Kickstarter, we actually took that card out and we said, oh, this card is, in the game, if you draw certain cards, you have to shuffle in an even scarier event card that it triggers. So we had infectious disease, and it would shuffle in outbreak. And so we went to those cards and we said, are these still relevant? Do we need to change these cards or anything? And if anything, we now had an indication of what a pandemic can do to the finances, global finances, and what it can do to, we've even seen what happens to some of the carbon and greenhouse gas changes. So we actually went in and we tweaked the card mechanics, because now we have some evidence of what an outbreak can do to the pollution levels in a city, and the economics of how things are going in a city. So it was really kind of interesting to kind of see the news come up, and then immediately go to the game and say, okay, how do we rebalance these cards in the game?
Yeah, no, it's especially relevant now, and it's definitely interesting to have that experience now as the world changes so much, and to have your game come out at this time too.
Yeah, and we were scared about that, honestly, for the Kickstarter. Was, should we do this Kickstarter right now? We had scheduled it for March, and we pushed it back a few weeks, but we made the decision to actually, like, after pushing it back a few weeks, to actually say, okay, let's go for it. We want to have this at least the campaign at least encompass Earth Day. And we wanted to basically give our friends and family something to cheer for. And what we were hoping was that we would find, more people who would want to kind of root for something that could be successful and could feel good. They could feel good about supporting and being a part of during the high anxiety times of COVID.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thankfully it worked out. We might not be having this conversation if everyone was like, what are you doing? We can't even play this game right now. It's social distancing. But people, I think, got it. And we're, the Kickstarter mentioned that the physical game comes out later in the year. We're definitely hoping to make use of what we can, a little bit of a buffer time for shipping and stuff like that during this time. But we had to plan out all of those pieces. And the folks who are asking me now, like, oh, how did you do it? It's your first Kickstarter. How were you successful? I've tried 3 or 4 and still haven't figured it out yet. And a lot of it was like actually listening to other folks who were doing Kickstarters and all of the ways in which they said that they failed. And we still didn't hit it out of the park in terms of getting all the things right. But we definitely said, hey, what could go wrong? And we used that as our prep work for the months leading up to the campaign.
Yeah, I'd love to touch more on that point. I mean, you mentioned that, a lot of people, they don't see success with the Kickstarter. They've launched several times. They, they haven't successfully funded. So it is a great accomplishment that you were able to fund so well. So I'm curious, you mentioned you focused on things that could go wrong and you addressed those. So can you give some examples of those aspects?
Yeah. So in the entrepreneurship world, they call it a pre-mortem. But it's like you basically look at the end of your campaign and you say, we didn't hit our goal. Why? And so when we did that exercise, we said, okay, it's the end of the campaign. We didn't hit our goal. And obviously number one was like, oh, nobody wanted to hear about a climate change card game during a pandemic. And we said, okay, well, we can't really do much about that. But we can continue to push the message that this is a meaningful and hopeful thing, and focus on that as opposed to sending out negative imagery or more anxiety producing stuff. And so we said, let's just make sure that we don't. Nothing about this feels scary. Nothing about this adds to anybody's woes. So that's kind of how we handled that line item. But then the other things that came up were all standard stuff that we'd heard from other Kickstarters. Was like, oh, we did shipping everywhere and we didn't account for how much it would cost. We didn't have our producer, the budget yet. And so at the end of the campaign, even if we did get funded, we ended up not making enough money to even like cover expenses. Another one was, we didn't communicate with the backers enough. We didn't communicate with people who were joining and give them opportunities to actually share with their friends. And so we said, okay, well, how do we plan for that? How do we schedule? Okay, every week we're going to have at least one communication, maybe 2 updates. And so it's kind of, we went through a bunch of these items and said, okay, these are all the ways that we could fail. And how are we going to, like, now that we've diagnosed the ways we could fail, let's actually figure out a solution before it happens. And I think for the most part, we got it right. The one place where I would have done more of was critically that first day is a big thing, right? The first day, you see a spike of folks who back the project, and you need that to be in the 20 to 30% range is what we've been told. And I think that's probably true. You probably need to like set your campaign goal at something like that you can, the group of people already on your email list, the people who are definitely going to show up and back it are somewhere in that range of can support you at 20 to 30% of your goal. But then you need to get them there on day one. And you need to like set make sure that they know those first 24 hours are critical. And if they've agreed to back the campaign, that's when they're going to put their weight behind it. And I think we could have done a better job of just like leading up to that, but we were nervous, honestly, about the like reaching out to friends and saying like, here, this day, really, you know, like it has to happen, and like hounding them. And I just am personally a little shy on social media. And so I'm not really like tweeting out all the time, and I'm not like poking my friends all the time saying like, you know, really, no, like do this. And I think I learned a little bit of courage to, you know, people kind of get it now. At least more folks kind of get, yeah, okay, if you need to poke me 3 or 4 times before I'm going to remember to show up on that day, or to you know, follow through with my pledge. So that was definitely a piece, where a learning piece. And then the other one, big one was, we really wanted to get a Projects We Love badge from Kickstarter, and we didn't. And that was one of the pre-mortems, is like, well, we didn't get Kickstarter's support here. And that was painful to us on that first day. And we didn't know if they would give us a badge later, or how that process worked. And it turns out that, like, for us, what we didn't realize, and now looking back on it, we would have changed, and certainly will for the next one, is how much Kickstarter depends on your project image and all of the images in your campaign to be built and tailored for their devices and their web portal. So it's like, I hadn't seen this anywhere. No one said, hey, get your images this dimension by this dimension. Make sure that if you don't try to put any other images out there like that look like this. Make sure you don't have too much of your game on the project image. Make sure it's like a compelling thing. Like, nobody I hadn't heard that from all of the folks before. And so it was kind of a shock. And we were like, oh, we didn't get the Projects We Love badge. When we asked about it, they said like, oh, make sure your images are better. And I was like, oh, really? That's what we needed to do. And you know, we also submitted without the video up for their review. And I think their review cycle is your best chance at earning that badge. So if you're really going for a Projects We Love, like, don't submit for review until you've got your page really as beautiful as you think you can make it. That was key for us, learning that. So hopefully next time.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't really realize that was a huge aspect either. Yeah, so when you mentioned like the pictures weren't like as good or not good enough, like what exactly does that mean?
If you look at some of the really high scoring or high funded campaigns out there, they're the 3rd or 4th campaign that entity or company or person has done. And you'll see that, you know, there's things that you can do, like put animated GIFs in there where it's beautifully like shows a story in an image. There's these long vertical banners that people do, and we learned how to do eventually, which was like all the game pieces and components you put in a vertical banner, so that as people scroll down, either on a mobile or on a desktop, they can see all the different components, and it has a visual appeal to it. But the biggest thing was that the like project image itself can't be cluttered. And when you see those campaigns that are really scoring high, it's like a face or the product with the product, or just the product itself. And for games, that's hard, especially when you don't have it all finished, and you can't just like show a beautiful box. For books, it's a little easier because it's like you just show the book cover, and as long as you've got that cover and it's pretty, then it's like that's what you get, that's the product. But for games, we wanted to show the solution cards, we wanted to show the tokens, we wanted to show the like a little bit of the play, a little bit of the branding and logo, and you know, the feedback was like, oh, it's just too cluttered. And so that was interesting. I wish I'd heard that, you know, 6 months ago, and we definitely could have taken the time to fix that before launching.
Yeah, that's a good thing to know, because I haven't heard anyone talk about that before, so that's definitely new information for me. And
it's
I'm
like
sure for most
6
people
links deep. Yeah, it's 6 links deep in the Kickstarter discussion, and then it was confirmed when we emailed them and said, hey, is there any chance we can still get a Projects We Love badge? And they were like, well, these are the 3 things that you need, you know, that we look for. And then they didn't promise anything. And then 40% of Kickstarter employees got laid off. And so
Yeah,
we're like,
yeah,
you guys have harder problems to solve right now.
yeah,
We're, more power to you. Thank you for continuing to keep the site up and even allowing us to
yeah,
do this campaign. So
yeah,
definitely no ill will towards Kickstarter. I think for us, it was like, oh, we really were hoping for that. And now we know what we can do to optimize our chances
yeah, for next time.
time around, but it's just a little late for the last one.
But despite that, you still got 100% funding on your project, and that's a huge accomplishment already.
Yeah.
So that's
I think there were two big successes. It was two of us. So she could go to her community of the climate folks. I could go to my community of the game developers and designers and play testers who we had play tested the game with over the last year. And so we were able to access two different communities, and that kept it fresh, and it kept I think it kept a healthy campaign. I think there's probably an over-reliance by some Kickstarter campaigns on like just one group of people and saying, okay, let's just get gamers, or let's just get tabletop gamers who like engine building games, because this is an engine building game. And it's like, yes, you might get that group, but it's not, I think it doesn't create as much of a healthy, like, oh, a lot of different people are getting interested in this. And it doesn't give you as much reach. So I think that was like diversifying our outreach to different communities was helpful. And we did manage to get a piece in a local newspaper. And I can't stress that enough. Like, there's always a local angle. That we have the climate change thing. Other people's games have like identity and culture. Other people's games have fun in the time of COVID. Like, there's always something, some spin, and getting just even like a small local online or physical newspaper involved and excited about your story is key. Some people go the podcast route. We didn't have that going for us, but that's a similar idea of like, get at least one thing that you can like brag about on LinkedIn or brag about on Facebook or what have you, so that you can say, look, we're doing this, it's exciting, and that really, I think that really helped. That got us a big boost when we hit the kind of doldrums in the middle, because every campaign has the big boost at the end and the big boost in the beginning and the big boost at the end, and then there's that like a little flatlining in the middle, and that helped us kind of get through that time, was having that article come out.
Yeah, so I'm curious, how did you get the article published? Did you connect with someone locally?
Yeah, so I think it was a friend of Alex's, my co-creator on the game. She had someone in her community was like, pitched it to their friends. So it didn't even have to be her like pounding the pavement and trying to find folks. I think she just mentioned like, oh, this is the game we're working on, here's the campaign. And they said, oh, I know someone who's covering games or covering climate. I think it was covering climate in this for this newspaper, this local newspaper. And nice. And so that one thing led to another. I think we could have and we will continue as we continue to develop and pitch the game and sell the game to folks, is work on that, like who are the groups of people who want to actually talk about what we're doing, and who would get excited about it for their listeners, for their audience. And so if you can go the podcast route, go the podcast route. If you have friends who know and write for a local paper or an online publication, make sure that you at least reach out to them and say, hey, is it all interesting? We're not trying to just sell. We're trying to actually, there's a reason why we're doing this. Like there's a purpose behind it. There's a meaning behind it. And that's usually the angle that they'll care about.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, your game it's funded, it's meet that goal, but I'm curious, what's your next goal for this game?
Yeah, so we got enough funding to produce and fulfill all the rewards. And we got one stretch goal, which was to offset the carbon emissions that we're going to end up having to create based on producing and shipping the game. So with those two in mind, it's like, how do we make sure that the design is polished? We still need to work on the box. And how do we make sure that we're going with the right shipper, producer who's going to, keep those emissions low, and recycled paper and soy-based inks, those kinds of things. So there's all of the minutia, the details of producing and fulfilling for our backers. Thankfully, that there's still a little bit of room. We can have extra copies made because producers have minimums, and usually the minimum is starts somewhere around 500 units. And so we have enough to produce 500 units. We'll have extra units of the game left over, and that's where we want to be able to kind of work on the messaging and marketing of the game. And that's getting into, we actually have a series of spots that I want to develop over the next few months, imagining it's 2040, and all of these solutions have already been enacted, and we won climate change. And so people talking about the last 20 years and what their favorite solutions were. So I'm trying to think through, like, how do we make that campaign rich and alive? Because we have 72 solutions now that each one has its own story, and it would be fun, I think, to tell the story in reverse, like tell it from the future back and say, oh yeah, well, I remember getting involved with restoring whales and that time on the beach when we were actually, it's like I could see kind of the storytelling aspect of looking at the future and saying, we won, how did we do it? And so it would be really neat to do that. And then we also have a digital version of the game that's in production right now. We have a volunteer group of Unity developers who in their spare time are just, adding value to the digital production. And we want to put that on mobile and put that in people's hands about the same time as when the game ships. So ideally, by the end of the year, we're out there where the game is a thing, and we can kind of start to get a little bit of credibility, both in the climate change community because of our work to help that conversation along, and in the game community to say, look, you can take games and apply them to the real world, and they can help us think about how we're actually interacting in the real world. And as a educator, as a entrepreneur, I really care about that being one of the core messages that this game gets out there, is whether it's climate, whether it's hunger, whether it's socioeconomic stratification, all of these. I have another game for about elections and changing how elections can work better. Like all of these things that we could do in society, we can gamify it first, and we can play test it, and we can see, okay, what would be different if we did it this way? And that game can be the inspiration for new ideas for us in the real world, for policy setting and education and business. It's such a healthy place to simulate what's possible and think through how you might change what's possible, is playing a game, on your dinner table.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool concept of gamification. I mean, it all kind of is a game, right? So being able to simulate that through a game actually, and to play test it and that aspect, that's a really cool thing that I didn't really consider, but that's really cool to me.
Yeah. So I'm excited to explore that concept more with this game and see where it can go, and then continue making more and more games that kind of dive into those kind of meaty society challenges, societal level challenges, and see what we can make of it.
Yeah, very cool. So if people want to learn more about Greenhouse, where can they go?
Greenhousegame.com. If you want to see the actual Kickstarter, you can find the Greenhouse game on Kickstarter. And then our page, which is when the Kickstarter campaign ended, we just put up a quick little page where you can pre-order the game. But we're going to be adding a lot of value to the greenhousegame.com URL, because all of the solutions as we implement, as we continue to build the game, we're going to post all the solutions up there and start sharing there. And then we also have a Facebook page, Greenhouse Game, the Facebook page. So if you can remember Greenhouse Game, then you can probably find us on a Google search or any major social media network.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Adam.
Awesome. Thanks, Kenny. Great to be chatting with you.